Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Lubalin lecture series presentation, July 1st. It is our third lecture in the summer edition. My name is Alexander. I'm one of the instructors in the TypeCulture postgraduate program in typeface design. For those who are new to TypeCulture events, TypeCulture is a postgrad program focusing on typeface design, but also graphic design, information design, lettering, typography, all things design adjacent as well. I will be presenting to you guys from New York. We have speakers from several other places, but first and foremost, the lecture series is part of Cooper Union, TypeCulture, and the Herb Lubalin the Herb Lubalin Study Center, which is creating the Herb Lubalin lecture series within TypeCulture. We will have a presentation followed by a Q&A session. We'll try to keep it to about 15 minutes, so stick around for the Q&A, ask questions. The questions, try to make sure to send questions not in the chat window, but the Q&A window. They might get lost in the chat. They might be hard to kind of find them. Obviously, feel free to converse in the chat, but focus sending questions to the Q&A window. That way we can find them all at the right time at the end of the event. And as you're chatting, make sure there's a toggle in the chat window. You can toggle from sending a message to everyone, which is basically everyone watching, or host and panelists, which is only going to be visible by the team. So if you want to send a general message, use everyone. If you have a message to the team running the event, use host and panelists. That will only be visible to us. I wanted to also acknowledge and thank TypeCulture for their generosity in sponsoring the recording of this talk and helping us build out the archive of lectures that we've had for the last more than 12 years. TypeCulture is an independent type foundry and a really wonderful academic resource around type and typography run by Mark Jammer, typeculture.com. The recording of this talk will be available. It's live streaming to YouTube right now. If you wanted to save the link, you could just click that in the top left corner. It'll open up a browser window with YouTube. You can keep that open. Pause it. That way you can return to it. That recording will stay on for a few days. Once we have an edited version, that will go to our Vimeo account. I wanted to also flag the two presentations we've had in the summer. We had a talk called What is Real? A presentation by Polymo Design Studio and XYZ Type Foundry about their collaborative project creating the Polymo Sans. We also had Michael Durrett and Norman Hathaway talking about 1970s lettering techniques. It's a kind of a peek into the work of Michael Durrett. So it's a recording, a lecture, and a demo. So it's super interesting. Very neat to see that live presentation, kind of showing Michael doing the lettering skills right on screen. And if you wanted to catch that talk and about 8 or 9 years of lectures in our archive, you can go to the Vimeo dedicated section of the Cooper Type. Or to Cooper Type/lectures, where the lecture listings are, and you can click on the individual talk, and then it should have an embedded video of the presentation in there. On the Vimeo account, we also have a lot of the lectures from Typographics Conference, our 10th edition just wrapped up a week ago. So Peter presented a few years back, so you can catch Peter's talk in typographics a few years back. So that'll be in the same location of vimeo.com/CooperType. So again, thanks to TypeCulture for letting us expand those talks. And one more lecture we have coming up in the summer cycle in 2 weeks on July 15th, same time slot, Monday afternoon for folks in the East Coast, and I guess like early evening in the European time zones. Morgan Pearson will be here presenting a talk called Writing Systems Archaeology and Type Design. Morgan is a freelance type designer specializing in ancient, disadvantaged, and non-encoded writing systems. The presentation will attempt to show how the study of unencoded or disadvantaged writing system highlights the crucial role of the design and the digitization process in preserving cultures and disseminating knowledge, particularly in the scholarly context. So a really interesting connection to some of the things you'll hear today, kind of closing out the summer with sort of these two interesting talks about designing type within these particular contexts. You can find that lecture, the sign up for that lecture on the CooperType/lectures link. I will also paste that into the chat so you guys can have a direct link. You could also take a screenshot of that QR code, but I'm posting the link to Morgan's directly to her talk. The video of that lecture will be embedded into that page, but you can also register there. So that's our fourth lecture. Closing out the summer, we will have more lectures in the fall, another 4, and then another 3, another 3 cycles of the next 24-25 lecture series. So 4 lectures in the fall, 4 lectures in the spring, and another 4 in the summer. You can sign up for the mailing list on the CooperType website, and then you'll be in the loop of announcements as they come in. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce today's talk, Designing Type for Accessibility. With us, we have 3 amazing speakers who will share their insight into this project. First and foremost, Peter Biľak, who will open up the conversation. Peter works in the field of editorial, graphic, and type design. He has been running the Typotheque Type Foundry since 1999. Joining him is Héctor Mangas Afonso, who has a background in cognitive psychology and neuroscience. He produces research for Typotheque, focusing on perception of type from accessibility to acceptance. And the third presenter joining them is Benjamin Ribeau, who is a partner at Integral Designers Studio based in Paris. With that, I will let Peter take over first, and then the other colleagues will join in through the talk. So thank you so much for being with us, Peter.
Thank you, Sasha. Thanks. It's lovely to be back. Well, last time it was in person, now online. Let me start the presentation. And if all went well, you see my first slide. All right, good. So today, as promised, we're going to talk about accessibility in type design. And I do realize that accessibility and inclusivity is a bit of a buzzword, and it appears in many different contexts. And even United Nations have a large section about what accessibility means. To avoid, to make it clear what we're talking about, we made a short summary. We're going to use accessibility as a term to define that we're going to try to make things, and in our case, is typefaces, usable by as many people as possible, and remove boundaries, whatever happens, that make them less usable. Now, if I look, Sasha mentioned that we've been doing this, designing type for quite some time. If you look at our collection of typefaces that we developed, in the last 25 years, most of them, they're designed to be different. They're designed to, for branding purposes, for identities, they're designed to stand out, which is, I would imagine, almost the opposite of what we're going to talk about. So rather than being driven by convention and being easy to read by everyone, is trying to find a very niche, unique voice, which is different from everything else. And we always seek something, another reason to make a typeface which never existed, and may not be the easiest to read, but it may fulfill a very specific purpose. Today, we're going to talk about something else. We're going to talk about, again, opposite of this, and seeing like how to make a typeface that takes many people into consideration, and especially people with disabilities, so different abilities, and also looking at what it means when that we will look beyond the Latin writing script and looking at the marginalized languages which they're not working as they are for English. I'm here joined by Héctor, and every time who is a cognitive psychologist and researcher with us, and every time we look at a new subject, we usually start with looking at what has been made. So rather than starting a new research from scratch, we live in a time when it's fairly easy to look what has been made, and there's a lot of information, with almost information overload. You can start searching through Google Scholar, which is a really good starting point, at various studies to address a specific question that we may have. But the same fact that there is enough information leads to also the fact that there's also information which we don't know how to deal with. Once in a while we come to extraordinary projects, for example, this one, which claims to enhance memory of readers. So typeface that is doing so much that it's incredible. And often these projects are then heavily publicized. In this case, the claim is that the obstruction of the learning process improves deeper cognitive processing, and that makes it easier to hard to read, but easy to remember things. In a project like this, when every time we look for evidence of why, what makes it true, what is the evidence for something like for such a claim, and often it takes time. So 2 years after the release of Sans Forgetica, and having received great deal of publicity, the first peer-reviewed study that demonstrates that finally proved that this typeface is not effective for enhancing memory, which comes as a disappointment. You almost want to believe that something is possible, and then you get just a perpetuation of evidence of information without evidence, that when finally something is proven, we seem like we are misled. It's not really true, as simple as it is. Another project which a lot of my friends and family members they shared with me was this bionic reading. Again, it claims with extraordinary claims that it makes things easier to read, and especially for people with reading challenges, people with neurodivergent, people with ADHD, with different neurodivergent factors. This one has been shared extraordinarily, like over TikTok and Facebook and Twitter. It has millions and millions of views. So this post by itself has close to 40 million views. And again, time passes, and someone finally takes a effort to look into it, and found no evidence that bionic reading improves reading speed at all. I'm not bringing this up to say that that we should be always skeptical of science. I'm just raising this to see that there's many projects which come with claims which are mainly marketing, and how we can kind of look through it. How to look at whatever dyslexia-friendly fonts, or fonts which claim to save ink, or are easier to read in fast speeds. Always, just look at what the evidence is for such claim, and see if it's realistic, and how it has how this evidence has been constructed. What methods have been made to test it. And so this doesn't work. None of these projects really are based on any science. The last projects from all of these, I have a personal experience with, because it is something that I published under somebody else's name 20 years ago when I was a young designer, and I thought it was funny to to make a prank that there could be typeface that improves the reading speed with the speed of subject in the car. So a typeface for highways, where the faster you go, the more legible it becomes. I proposed it to magazines. It was published. It was published in books and magazines, but no, it's not true. It was a joke, and I now almost regret doing this. Like, because it was too easy to do something like this. This wasn't published to sell anything. It was just to prove, like how easy it is to do something like this, kind of pseudoscience. And my friends urged me to remove any evidence of this because people want to believe it. People want to believe extraordinary information. That's something that that it sounds so fantastical that it challenges everything we know. So there's always willingness to believe something like this. Anyway, we'll talk about a lot more boring things. Because a lot of the progress is a small, subtle improvements of the existing studies. And when we decided a few years back, and I was trying to trace back when we decided to start working on this, I believe it was 4 years ago. We're looking for a typeface that would be as inclusive as possible. And for this, we wanted to find a model that would serve, looking at how to build and establish models. And of course, in the world of typography, the two dominant models for Latin typography are the sans and the serif. And there's been a lot of discussion about the effectiveness or ease of reading of serifs and sans. And there's no conclusion. There's no one doesn't necessarily make it. The presence or absence of serifs do not really change too much. And there's been various studies and efforts to prove it or disprove it. But it seems to be that legibility is established by many other things and not just presence or absence of serifs. And what makes type easy to read is mainly its optimization, size-specific optimization for its destination. It just happened that most of the serif typefaces were optimized for very small sizes, and when they're digitized, finally, from metal type, they're using the scans that are used for small sizes and that make them a lot more easy to read. And often the serif fonts, low contrast fonts, the sans serif fonts, low contrast fonts, they were available in much larger sizes. So when the first digitization happened, they were able to use much bigger samples, which changed some of the parameters. If you look at a type for small and large sizes, usually the difference is mainly the use of white space. Fonts for large sizes tend to be very tightly spaced. They tend to be lighter. And this is one example. For example, a low contrast typeface using metal type, the top one, Accents Grotesque. In metal type, it was quite heavy, very loosely spaced, and when it was Helvetica digitized and taken large sample sizes, it's often too light, too densely spaced. So doing a lot of observations, what makes something read in big and small sizes, and trying to work out if there would be typeface that could work in both, in large and small sizes. And we realized that it's not possible to do with one design. It will have to be multiple designs, probably two extremes, that would take all the information that we have, everything we have learned so far, and take it and build it as a starting point. So the text version needs to use open counters to prevent confusion, which allows readers to accurately decipher text in small glance. We know that loose spacing is probably the most important attribute of text typeface. The contrast works differently in text in large and small. The proportions, vertical proportions, they tend to be quite different. We see that the closeness of counters, while they emphasize letter similarities and they look very attractive in large sizes, the very same feature also makes it harder to read. So the predictability of typefaces like Helvetica, it works really well in large sizes, but when it's reduced to small sizes, it becomes harder to read. There's some explanation why it is. For example, here in this diagram, according to the Gestalt law of closure, when we're looking at image with missing parts, our brains fill that gap to information, and we want to, for example, when we see a shape like C, we almost want to close it, and when it closes, becomes a no. So we're designing typeface, which would be designed for small and large. You would never see it, in this size. Now I'm comparing this display and text size. It would be designed more like for this, that we would get most out of it in headlines, and then you could not really compare it, what the differences are, but it would maintain the same feeling, same voice, and same color, but use completely different principles to communicate the messages. During this project, while we're working on this, a coincidence happened. We've done some work with Studio Integral from Paris, and and we often have communication about upcoming projects. And during development of this typeface, there was one email from Benjamin, and I'll give him a word to explain what happened next.
Thank you, Peter. As you said, we have shared some projects by the past, but this one was particular. I'm going to change now, just to say a few words on these projects. We've already worked with Typotheque on the Vienna airport, the wayfinding system, which required a custom-made typeface. That's how we work at the studio. We try as much as possible to really have something really singular, and it always goes through typography at the beginning. So we, of course, when we can use new typefaces, we also really are interested in techniques and in the way that these typefaces can both digitally or in printing solutions can be observed. So we've worked with Typotheque and Peter for the Vienna airport, but also for the Grand Paris Express, which is a much more like an information system, global information system about new subway lines, which are opening right now in Paris. So it was, of course, in a typographic, really interesting exercise to work with different languages and also with illustrations. So those are among the works we've already done with Typotheque and Peter. As for the project I'm going to talk to you about is concerned and really is close to what Peter said about the way we are happy to work on distinctive typographies. Is this work was really interesting. We started with a contest for the 1520, the 1520 hospital, which is specialized in visual impairments. It's the only public hospital in France. It's in Paris, sorry, which is specialized in this topic. So they launched a contest to work for the global, all the buildings of the hospital, and to redo the wayfinding system. So at first, when we answered, of course, we tried to find this typographic angle and really imagine at the beginning how we could have a custom made typeface. So of course, the idea is always the same, to look around that and try to see at what state the research or the different works are at. And so I called, I sent an email to Peter to know if he had some information about researchers going on around special fonts and really adapted impairments in visual diseases. So he told me that he was working on this type, which we're presenting today. So we at first we of course had a look at what the tools the hospital had between its hands, and he had some sort of a corporate design tools such as this type, which was much more made for edition for some of the documents that they were editing at the hospital, but it wasn't really the purpose to use this font on the wayfinding system, because we really quickly saw that it wasn't made for it. So we had some problems with the drawing, with the spacing. We had a very maybe a little monotonous shapes, which were really not interesting or really required too much work. So we started a little over and without considering this type. We had this inventory to do at first for the hospital. So we took several photographies and made a lot of files to explain to the hospital what was working and what was not. And as you can see, and it's obviously the case in a lot of hospitals, but since they have the time to really well replace all these informations, they really stick things one upon another on another, and so that's pretty well, that's really a break to all these facilities in orientation, of course. And when you have, of course, to update some information, this is how it looks. It's done on a printer in an office, and it's just added to the existent. So this was our mission, really, to try to at first make this inventory, sorry, and then find solutions with the type, with a challenge we had and which we explored later on, and Héctor is going to talk about all the research done with this challenge, was to try to have a typeface really adapted to the different pathologies in the hospital. So there are several, and that was the challenge, to experiment the reading facilities of those types. The colors, the shapes, of course, the contrast, and then try to be as general as possible.
Perfect. Thank you, Benjamin. Wonderful. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
So yes, Benjamin was mentioning we wanted to make sure that we were optimizing the typeface that was going to be used on the hospital for the users of the hospital. And as we were talking about, we started by looking at the maps of the hospital and the layout of everything within the facilities. And one of the first things that struck us was that the different maladies that are treated in the hospital are treated in different areas, in different sectors that are very clearly defined. So a patient that would walk into the hospital would only navigate a certain space within it. And we soon realized this. We also reviewed all the different visual diseases that are treated in the hospital, and we identified 4 target groups, well, 3 patient groups and a control to also account for that. And these are peripheral vision loss, so people that can see on the sides of their vision, a central vision loss, which is basically a big blob of darkness in the center of the eye, and extreme blurry vision, one that can be fixed with correction. So just a very, very, very strong blurry vision. And as I was saying, these were treated in different areas. So we expected the patients, for example, with glaucoma, to only encounter signs on the wayfinding elements that were distributed around the hospital in a certain area, because they would only move around there. So with this premise, And as Peter was saying before, after reading quite some literature and quite some research that had been done on this, we soon realized that it might be the case that one typeface couldn't just fix all of our problems, and we just couldn't find a silver bullet that could address all of the problems and solve all of these. So we very early on realized that maybe one version of the typeface wouldn't be enough. These are just some examples, some papers that we found very relevant at the very beginning of our literature review. And as you can see here, among the 3 papers that I just brought up, there's a common factor. Width of letters is highly influential when it comes to the readability, especially in certain demographics, in certain low vision readers, people with specific, very specific impairments. But before I dive into this, I want to walk you through a pilot that we realized we had to do before starting to do the actual research for the hospital, and this entailed Helvetica. Helvetica is one of the typefaces that was used in the signage. You could see it in the pictures that Benjamin showed before, and we wanted to compare the previous signage against the new version of the signage, the new version of our type, in 3 different settings, which ranged in width. Here you can see some of the findings. These are some plots that show reaction times. Here on the left, you can see the patients from the blurry vision group. In total, 24 people participated in the pilot. And the vertical axis represents reaction times. So basically, how long the person took to react to the letters. Here you can see the average reaction time for Helvetica and the 3 widths, from narrower to wider, of our typeface, of the typeface that we were researching. And here, as you can see, there's a very big gap between the 2, and also a trend that we can see shows that the wider, the better, at least for this group, right? If we move on to central vision loss patients, we see, again, a big gap and also a trend within these. And for the 2 other groups that we were looking at, the peripheral vision loss patients, we see the same gap with the reaction times, and three different also averages for the typeface we were researching. As I was saying before, we also included a bunch of healthy participants, healthy vision participants, to also account for this. We also wanted to make sure that making the type very specific for a demographic didn't impair readability for other groups. It was very important for us to also take this into account. And as you can see, one of these groups, the peripheral vision loss, had a very different results from the other 3 groups. So as you can see here, the narrower version of Zed scored better than the other 2. It wasn't significant between these 2, but it was against the wider one. During this first phase, we were consulted by Sophie Beyer from Denmark, from Copenhagen, from the Center of Visibility Design, and she advised us to take into consideration these different things. But this hypothesis proved to not actually be true when we repeated this experiment with more participants, and I will walk you through these findings just now. So I'll tell you first how we did this, how we measured the readability of these letters, because it wasn't just about asking people which one of these versions you read best. It was very important that we accurately measured it in a replicable way that we could repeat. The pilot that I was just discussing used the same methods as the full experiment that I will walk you through now. So to begin with, we devised this stimuli, these different variations of Z that ranged from narrower, the version A, to very wide, the version F. And they were adjusted in weight and spacing to adjust for the difference in width. The person would sit in front of a stimulus screen 2.5 meters away, and they had in reach a controller, which was basically a keyboard that they could press when they needed to react to the stimuli. This is how it looked. It was a remote Bluetooth controller, and the screen was connected to a MacBook. The MacBook was running some bespoke software that we designed at Typotheque. Roberto Arista, my colleague, worked on this. And we developed this bespoke software that could measure reaction times very accurately. And the way in which the person would react to the stimuli was the following. So The person would fixate on the center of the screen, which you will see now. And then a string of 4 letters would show up in increasing size. It would get bigger. The person had to react pressing one of the keys. And then they would have to report which of these similar looking versions of the text they had just read. They repeated this 120 times, each time with a different string of letters. And this made 20 times for each of the 6 variations that we were researching. So these gave us a very good average. We repeated this task so many times to have a good average without noise and without ambiental factors that could be influencing this for each of the versions. And we did this with 55 patients who were screened by staff from the hospital and who were walked through and advised by medics from the hospital, by 3 medics from the hospital. In total, these 55 patients could be broken down in 4 groups, as I was mentioning before: 15 for blurry vision, 11 for central vision loss, 15 for peripheral vision loss, and 14 controls. And the results are the following. We could study and realize very soon that there was a very clear trend when it came to width. And what we were looking for in these graphs, this represents the same thing that we were looking at before for the pilot. Vertical axis is reaction time. Horizontal axis, in this case, it doesn't have Helvetica because we dropped it after we realized that it wasn't worth comparing it against the versions. So after the pilot, we removed it. And so in the horizontal axis, you can only see different versions of Zed, the ones that I showed you just before. And as I was saying, what we were looking for was a plateau. So the moment in which making the letters wider stopped being beneficial, because for spacing reasons, it's not logical to just have a very, 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 very wide sign for the wayfinding. And so we were trying to find the optimal point in which widening the letters stopped being beneficial. And we found this place to be, after running the appropriate statistical analysis here for the central vision loss group, and in the same place for the peripheral vision loss group. Sample sizes were 11 and 15 people. When we look at the results from blurry vision, we see that instead of version C, version D is better for this group of patients. So it stops being beneficial for them after this. So these 2 versions do not show any advantage, and the same would go for healthy vision loss. So this basically makes these 2 results, these 2 findings from the research. These 2 adjustments are the optimal for these 4 groups. For the central and peripheral vision loss groups, it's this one, this version, and for blurry vision and healthy vision groups, it's the following wider one. All of these findings, a long report with all of these findings and the methods that we used, and also an interactive experiment that you can try out, is available online on typotheque.com. You can read it. It's pretty lengthy, but it gives you a lot of insight about this. It also has a full list of references that you can look at there, the references that we used for this. I will give the word back to Peter, I believe, or no, to Benjamin, I think.
Thank you, Hector. Which is really interesting about this project also is that we're really on a method of research application. So when we were running those tests, of course the drawing of the font was still in progress, and also for us it was interesting to test different materials and different way of using this typeface on different elements in space. So we started with different prototypes, different techniques also, and this is the font we are using now. So we're of course really meticulous in using this font with the different spacing. We're always, of course, discussing with the Typotheque team to have something optimal. This is also in process, the drawing of the different icons, because also as you work with the hospital, different needs come along, and so we have to adapt, of course. What we try to do also from the beginning is to have a sort of a modular way of using this wayfinding system, to have something really could be adapted to a lot of circumstances. So we have this little play with different elements as numbers or directions or different names, and of course icons. So this is a way of having something pretty flexible in the way we can adapt our wayfinding system to different circumstances. We also have in charge, so this is in process. This is really going on. We already have done just, I'll say, like 5% of the hospital, but this mission is going on until 225. So this is furniture also for the for outside. And what we also wanted to do is to have this font applied to this modular system, like I told you, but something really which looked like an object. We made different tests with the material, and we had metal at the beginning, and everything was too clinic and not really in place. So we decided to work both with in sort of a resin and also wood. That's the blue part you see here. And also to play with the different angles and made the whole thing more lively. So this is what's in place right now, or part of. So of course we have some wayfinding system outside, and then we have different boxes which have numbers. We have different orientation applications. Sometimes we have to adapt to existing buildings, so it has its own code for colors. So we use them as also a way for the patients to to orient themselves. The difficulty also is that of course almost all of the patients have problems with moving and seeing everywhere. So there are no really total blind people, but they all have different pathologies and have to be assisted all the time. So we try to be as clear, as simple as possible. So this is what's in place right now. And I'll let Peter go on. We can hear you, Peter.
Okay. Am I audible now? Yes. All right.
Yeah.
We were very fortunate that this happened. This was not planned. You know, when we started working on this typeface, and now the typeface is called Zed, we are not planning actually to do very wide width. So I think this is one of the benefits of not working just independently in a studio, but allow someone else to use a typeface. And that's why we have this program that we often show what we're working on. You know, if you have worked with us, you know, you can log into a section of our website and see the fonts in development, and it can really improve typefaces. And this collaboration with Integral and, you know, the Hector's feedback and Benjamin's feedback actually led to a lot of improvements, a lot of changes in how the project was structured. So, and I mean, it was very fortunate that, you know, it happened in the right time, not too soon before we, you know, when it was not defined, but not too late when it was not too late to change it. So I'll show you a little demo movie that we show when the project was launched, and it was launched just 2 weeks ago. Let's see. Oh.
It takes millennia for ecosystems, forests, grasslands, wetlands, and plants to develop, and only a short time for them to be lost forever. It is the same with languages. Half of 7,000 languages spoken today are at risk of extinction. In fact, we lose one language every 2 weeks. Zed is a typeface designed for inclusivity and accessibility for the old and the young, wherever they live, for populations that technology has always served, and for communities it has kept on the periphery, for major languages and those that are digitally disadvantaged. Zed has been created to preserve cultural diversity, a typeface for a better world.
So now Zed is not one typeface. We're presenting as a Zed typeface, but in fact, it's a collection of 22 different packages of fonts, all with very distinct, very different proportions and very different feelings, optimized for small and large, with very different proportions, and also different terminals and different construction. And these 22 packages can be converted to about 540 individual styles of fonts. So it's a lot of different fonts, and I explained why this was important. So it's not one thing, it's a collection of, it's a system that can work for very different purposes, ranging from different widths, which became very important, and explores a couple of different themes. Until now we're looking at the theme of accessibility for visually impaired readers, but I think equally important is also accessibility or inclusivity in terms of linguistic inclusion. This first part of Zed, which came out 2 weeks ago, addresses only the Latin writing script, but within the Latin, we paid extraordinary attention to writing scripts which don't have, which have been underserved, mainly because they're using, either the orthography requires characters which are not common, and we were researching these indigenous languages of North America, but also South America and Africa, paying attention to smaller languages which were digital disadvantage, not having enough fonts, not having sometimes non-encoded characters, sometimes missing character, sometimes missing keyboard layouts. So one of the components missing to make it truly work. We're pleased that right after the release, the typeface received the European Gold Prize, but that's not the point. I'm putting, and if you were at the typographics, 2 weeks ago, you may have seen this brochure, which summarizes the research part of the project. But going back to languages, Unicode, which is this international standardization body for written language, estimates that out of the 7,000 languages which are known to humanity, 98% are categorized as digitally disadvantaged. And this is what I mentioned. Being disadvantaged digitally means that you either your language is not fully encoded, so you cannot really actually write your language digitally. You can do it in handwriting, you can speak orally, but it makes the language quite vulnerable because you cannot represent it digitally. You cannot text it, you cannot have a Wikipedia page. So encoding is the first level of that is important to standardize language. The second is having the tools, being the fonts or the keyboard layouts, and finally having the full support of the operating systems that it understands what it needs to do, including shaping, including rendering the correct version, and sometimes they're localized versions of every character, so it's not just one character. And during this work with indigenous languages of North America, we paid attention to the group of languages which are used in Canada, in the very north of Canada and in British Columbia. There's a Halsu community, for example, used in the Bella Bella community, which we came to realize they're missing a couple of characters for the full representation of the language. And in such case, what we do is that we work with community and try to document the orthography needs, the needs of the language and community. And with their support, we're able to draft a proposal that would complete the standardization of the languages and make the proposal submitted to Unicode, which again, it's this body that maintains stability of written language. This proposal takes time to develop. It needs to be backed by the community itself. So we would have to make a community outreach, work with language keepers And finally, only when this work is done, which takes, quite a long time, we're able to bring it to Unicode, have it approved, and Zed will be the first typeface that serves all these communities in the same way how it serves, languages that we speak, English, French, something which we take for granted. But for small languages, it is not. Many small languages face a lot of challenges, a lot of hurdles, because they were not fully standardized before. We develop methodologies how to work with communities. Often we made agreements with communities about sharing of data, about ownership of the data. Something which we take very seriously because our collaboration is based on trust. And how to when we ask for a lot of data from themselves, we need to make clear how it's going to be used. So we talk about this. There's a section on our website that talks about this work. It's a work which is directed by Kevin King, a researcher at Typotheque. And Kevin has been working with previously with the communities in Nunavut, which is in the northernmost province of Canada, which use the syllabic script. And previously, we standardized and completed the missing characters of syllabic. So there are 12 characters for the sounds of Natalik, one of the dialects of Inuktitut that were not standardized previously, and we're able to edit. So people, for the first time, they could write their own names. Today, I won't have much time to talk about it, but if you're interested to know about this work with the syllabic script, there's a separate documentary film about that collaboration. So Zed is aiming to support, again, communities of people which were disadvantaged because of their visual disabilities, but also, aiming to support as many writing scripts as possible. So right now, although the Latin has been, launched first, we're working on 25 different writing scripts at this very moment, and each of them will have the same language support and same stylistics support and so many styles as the Latin itself. So, this is, for example, work right now on a Devanagari script, which is the largest script, writing script of India. And this is, how a Zed looks like, in these different languages that we're currently working on. This is an ongoing, continuous work, focusing on basically all areas of the world, and mainly, like areas where there's a huge linguistic diversity and many languages were ignored for various reasons, technical or political. It is exciting and often unprecedented to work with these scripts because, many of them, they hardly had any digital fonts, and now they would come, with such a great variety that it would make a real difference for the communities. As you can imagine, this is not work of individual, it is a teamwork, and we're making sure that we're always working with native designers and project being validated by the language keepers and the community itself. It's not the first time we work in this part of the world. We've been working in India and South Asia for over 15 years. And if you're interested to know about this project, which is basically an area which covers over 2 billion speakers, there's another separate documentary movie that talks about this. And what we find exciting is that we take not just the typographic knowledge and experience, but also the work that Hector has mentioned, that we try to observe and not just make assumptions, how it may work for other scripts, but we test it. For example, Hector and Roberto from our team traveled to Bangkok a few months ago to make a series of tests about reading of Thai, because the conventions of Thai typography are very different from Latin. And there's no concept of serifs and sans, but there's a similar concept about loopless and looped styles of letters for Thai typography. So we went there and organized a different set of experiments, one similar to what has been made for the hospital, and another one, a different one about continuous reading using eye tracking devices. They were able to measure implicit and explicit preferences, and also performance, how different types of proportions, different types of letters affect the reading, performance of reading. I'll give a word briefly to Hector again, But I'll show you, this is the smallest set, this is the Zed Latin as it is available. And Zed Latin includes Braille characters, which is a separate writing script by itself. But we make sure that's included in every subset that it will come, because Braille can represent many different languages and writing scripts in the world. Hector, I think you can talk about this research part.
Yes, sure. So as Peter was saying, yeah, we went beyond the visual difficulties, and we tried to also include people that are completely blind, that can't see. And by looking at this, as we've discussed a few times, we've mentioned a few times, the first thing we need to do is look at previous work and previous things that have been written about the topic. And one of the first things that we found was a bunch of disagreement on one specific thing, which is not width of characters, but the spacing between the dots. Here you can see different spacing settings that we were looking at for Braille that ranged from 2.5 millimeters between the centers of the dots to 3.25. These come from different guidelines that are being used by different associations of the blind around the world. And we went to the Spanish Association for the Blind, and we actually went and asked for advice with this. We made a trip to it, and one of the things that they mentioned is that it really depends. The readability of Braille really depends on the medium in which the text is set. For example, this is photocopying paper. This is a paper that's printed with normal, regular black ink, but the paper is special. And when it's printed, it triggers, when you're exposing it to light, it triggers some emulsion and it just grows. So the Braille is produced this way. But in the previous slide, you're seeing just the novel printed with punch Braille. So basically these are punctured through the paper, and you can see it's double-sided. These ones are on the other side of the paper, and these ones are on this side. And this is achieved by basically printing one side and then offsetting the grid slightly and printing the other side. So as I was saying, the legibility of Braille really depends on the medium that you're using and also the place of the user. So it really depends on the nationality of the reader and so on. So we decided to include for Zed Braille the four different versions, and we asked Braille, the Braille Association here in Spain and the Blind Association here in Spain to give us some advice, and they recommended 2.75, which is the second millimeters between dots. And we replicated this in Croatia with the Blind Association of Split, and they replicated the results, so they confirmed what we expected. And additionally, for enhanced readability, we've also launched Zed Braille with a little bit more of width between points to basically make it even more legible for those who might have like problems in the tips of their fingers, or they might be impaired. For maybe many blind users have diabetes, and so that also causes less sensitivity in the tips. So it's also good for these users to have a bit more spacing between dots. And all of these findings are summarized in this article that I'm referencing, and you can go read online on typotheque.com again.
Right. I'm going back. So we've covered so far the Latin script and the various adjustments for various types of demographics and different visual impairments, then different writing scripts for different needs of around the world. But besides different writing scripts and even Braille, there's another way to communicate, and people know the emojis. The icons overcome linguistic barriers completely. So there is a benefit of using not words but pictograms. So we currently working on a set of pictograms that would complement a Zed type system. This is not released yet. This is going to become later this year. We work with Andrei Job, who's a designer. He's worked on many of our projects with us. And we identify a set in the first series, a set about 1,000 different icons optimized for accessibility, but also user interfaces and also orientation systems. So basically 3 areas and each of the icons, each of the 1,000 icons, they come with 3 design axes. You can control the optical axis. Well, first you can control the weight. So you see the figure Each of the icons comes with these variations. You can make it a little heavier or lighter, depending if you want to accompany it with typeface, which is lighter or heavier. You can control the optical size, meaning how small or how large it's going to be used. The smaller it is, the more open space and the white space is inserted in the icon. And then finally, you can control the roundness. So basically, you can control the visual appearance and tune it to the specific context of what you're designing. Besides this, we also, every time we encounter a situation when a symbol may not be understandable easily across different cultures, we localize the symbols. So, for example, in symbols of ambulance comes with different, localized versions. So you can choose it in different areas to choose the appropriate icon. Here you can see, how an ambulance would work in Muslim countries or in Israel, or, in country where there's a universal symbol for ambulance. There's another term which we often come across, and that is emotional accessibility, which is basically, you could almost think of it as the opposite of modernism. When in modernism, we looked for one universal solution for all. With emotional accessibility, we're talking about respecting individual preferences of people and how specific needs, they can be addressed by, or how they change with different contexts. So the reason why Zed typeface system comes with so many different variables is that, there's not one version that works in all situations. So Zed comes as a variable font where you can control the weight and width. But you can also control, the roundness or slanting. So you can make it either highly functional, or you can actually make it, display looking, because the needs are very different. It is not one typeface, that does one job, but it can be adjusted to different context. The rounding, the softening is actually quite surprising that we could actually make it that, the edges of the typeface can go from round to square in a variable way, which is quite unique and probably hasn't been done much before. And the same thing we do with the icons. So there's no slanting, but you can control the optical sizes of every icon, and you can control the weights and the rounding as well. So you can really almost control the friendliness or the informality or formality of each icon. Finally, we're getting, you've seen this video, the presentation video, where we had these images of plants and made a metaphor because it's very hard to visualize languages, which is something abstract and fleeting. So instead, we chose, image of a plant, and we worked with the 3D artist called Andrea Philippon, and we identify a series of 4 plants, 2 which are extinct and no longer exist. For example, this one. This is a plant which doesn't exist. It's been rendered in digital way. It's a plant which could be found in Hawaii, but it is not. This is another one which is highly endangered. And we were working, with this artist to show, the richness of the world, in the same way how this is another plant. This one is found in Corsica. And we found surprising, overlap between linguistic diversity and biodiversity. Often, when we lose a language, it is caused by displacement of people. It is caused by changes because of climate changes or because of extraction of resources. And the same very changes change not just biodiversity, but changing also linguistic diversity. So often the same places which are losing, the biodiversity, they're losing languages. And I'm going to end this presentation with this image, which is not showing the light pollution, but showing the languages which are not to expect to survive 21st century. Out of the 7,000 languages which we know today, half of them are expected not to survive for various reasons. And they're grouped. The orange ones here on this map are the ones which are already lost. They are extinct. They have 0 speakers. All the others, they consider to be endangered, and they're various level of vitality. And we believe that with the work that we're doing, we can increase the chance of survival of many of the languages. Thank you. going to end the screen share and have a look if there are questions that people may have.
Yeah. Let me just arrange this so you guys can see all of us. I think that should give us all 4 in the grid. Thank you so much, the 3 of you. It's like an amazing body of work and amazing research, and it's really great to hear you kind of give us a glimpse into a very complicated project, and obviously something that is going to continue evolving as more things kind of develop. I had a question just to get things rolling, but I'm gonna save that for maybe a little bit later. There's quite a few questions in the Q&A. If you guys want, I can take some questions. Peter, if you see anything that jumps out, feel free.
I think I'll probably pick one and I'll circle through others. There's one obvious one. You know, there's a one asking, how is the project funded? Do you manage to have access to these communities, and how long? So it's a project of how we're doing this. There's no external funding to this. You know, like we are TypeFoundry, which we survive by creating work and hoping that our work is being used, and we licensing our work. You know, we hope that, you know, all of you will buy our fonts, and that helps to fund this. And right now, our model is basically this. You know, like when you use even, you know, simple Latin fonts that you do, 50% of our profits fund the work on languages which do not have economic model. For example, you know, we work with the syllabic scripts. You know, there's hardly 100,000 people who use the syllabic script, but it doesn't mean we put less resources into it. We actually put more resources in languages which have small number of users, because there's a higher need. You know, there's almost, you know, like the syllabic fonts which we've shown, and Zed will be one of them. It's the first complete fonts, so we can actually can make a lot of impact by producing work which hasn't been produced previously. So by selling our fonts, we fund it, but also we look for different economic models. What we started last year, we started something called Typotheque Club, where people can sign up and see what we're working on, provide the feedback. But we also do the crowdfunding. So for example, we organize a crowdfunder for development of Cherokee fonts. We work with Chris Killern, a Cherokee designer in Oklahoma. And we managed to, you know, successfully complete it. So find the funds to create Cherokee fonts, again, in a situation when there is no economic background to do it. So we're looking always for ways how to do it. And the second part of the question is about, you know, if you work with the communities, of course, you know, that's the only way to do it. So, you know, the Cherokee font is made with Cherokee nations. There's a lot of validation, a lot of feedback. And when we work in Canada, there's a lot of collaboration between, you know, various communities across Canada, and they all have the say in this. So there's there is a rigorous validation of the project, making sure that, you know, we test it, show it to the elders. And only when, you know, the project's ready, then, you know, we can actually, you know, publish it and hope that it will be used. And sometimes it's used by bigger companies, which pay for bigger licenses and allows us to go further, continue doing this work. Should pick another question for Hector and Benjamin now. Is there one?
I think there's something about testing, wayfinding testing, like distances. I don't know. If
yeah, so that question, that's interesting. The thing is with the 15-20 hospitals, which is really interesting, is that you have really medics working on research. So what they want to do is they want to test in intern with all their collaborators, but also with the people using and the patients. And so we have feedbacks all the time. So we test, of course, in place, but we then have some feedbacks from the different teams, and then we approve all of this. And I think that's also it goes the same way that Peter explained with the communities. You always have to exchange all the time, and not to be really persistent in one way. You have to question again and again. So that's interesting. Maybe to just say one word about the funding is what is also interesting with our project is that we, of course, had to manage how to how to find a little money to do those experiments. And the hospital played the game, and we really, in this case, were pleased to see that they were looking also for different fundings to pay the experiments. So that wasn't the first idea at the beginning, but when they were really seduced and really surprised by this project and how it was going, they really make efforts to try to get some money elsewhere in different foundations, associations, and so we got a little budget like this also. So in this case, we really have to bet on the intelligence of course, our clients and researchers that really play the game with us. That's important too.
Right. There's a quick question about IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet, not the beer. Yes, that includes the full phonetic alphabet. In the first phase, because many of these IPA characters are used by the indigenous languages of North America, so included for this reason. Also, many African languages use the IPA, so they're not specifically made for dictionary use, for the phonetic use, but it can be used like this. And we notice there's a difference between, when a natural language is using it versus, dictionary use. When in dictionary, you're basically looking for, individual words, and you don't engage with reading. So often the appearance of the same characters encoded in the same way is different depending on the context. So we've been paying a lot of attention about how, again, that has to do with a connection with the communities, how some characters which are encoded in a certain way actually need to look differently when they're used by these communities. So, for example, there are a lot of Greek characters used for, languages in Canada, but they have a different preference, so they don't look really like Greek letters. The contrast distribution is different. And that's the difference between, how the IPA characters used for phonetics are used when they are used in single words versus natural language expression. So that's...
There's a question that came in a little bit early, I think anticipating the talk about the closed captioning. I don't know if you wanted to take that, like relationship between closed captioning.
Right. This is what Hector has been talking about, that, we're trying to make the typeface as easy as to read, and we notice that making it wider is highly beneficial for people with visual impairments, but also healthy readers. But the price you pay is quite a severe one. You're running out of space. So, in closed captioning, if you choose for very, very wide letters, you will not fit as many letters. So that's why we do the experiments to see, at what point, it stops being beneficial. Like when the trend, so we have to accommodate two factors, like ease of reading, but also make it practical. And that's the same thing for the hospital. And if I remember right, the question was about, will it work on TV? I believe, a reading process is the same regardless of the medium. There's some adjustments, about resolution, about inversion, black and white, white on black, and that needs to be, compensated with, increasing thickness and, having how to work with white space. But in general, your eye doesn't change, regardless of the application. So we study, basically the most important attribute is basically the visual angle, the distance of the message and the size of the message. And so we always try to optimize it for this. So, and I think there was a couple of questions also about specific software, if it works in Word or in the Adobe software. It works everywhere. This is not a specific, Zed is not a typeface that would work only one application. It's independent from software, independent from application. And the whole reason why there's such a big spectrum of it is that we can choose the right, variant for every situation. Let's pick another. Hector, is there something?
There's one, yeah, Daniel asks, what role does the color of the typeface play in this work? They say that they saw that text and icons were in black. Have you experimented with other colors in different contexts? Yes, so to answer the first part of the question, yes, it plays a role. Especially the factor that plays the biggest role is contrast. So foreground and background, the contrast between the two is the main thing that affects legibility. So that's why we took the deliberate decision of making the text black, pitch black, and the background white, the brightest white. because this very high contrast would mean the best optimal setting for this. And that we also transferred over to Integral when we were designing this, when they were designing the signage, to also try to keep in mind the ratio of contrast that the letters had. So yes, it plays a role, a big role between this.
I don't know if Benjamin have something to add to this, or would you?
Not really. We just well, we worked with the really dark blue and not with a pure white. We have something like it's more like has a little yellow in it. It's pretty smooth. So that was one of the issue to know if we were really on a black and white application, or if we could be maybe some other more smooth and maybe interesting alternatives. So that's what we chose at the end. And like said Hector, the dark background we tested with white lettering wasn't really efficient and really seen for the patients as something a little aggressive. And also that's maybe because of the technique, but we use digital printing, and we had this little blurry thing around the letters, which wasn't really comfortable to read through.
Yeah.
I'll answer one question about asking what are the common mistakes designers make when creating accessible typefaces? Because I find it personally quite interesting that there is a belief that making things unusual, harder to memorize, I mean, like adding extra strokes, differentiating letters even more will be helpful. And we haven't seen evidence of doing this, so usually very simple morphological skeletons are the most efficient to doing it. So every time you see typeface which adds a stroke to Q and like crossing it and adding extra things to simple shapes like I and L, actually, for example, like adding a top bar to I, it actually complicates things so much that in some combinations, there can be collisions of letters and be harder to read. So usually the simpler the better, but the type designers kind of resist that. They're trained to make a difference, to make them very unique. So it is very, that is a common mistake, that they're trying to rethink the skeleton. Well, I think a lot of the solution is really about the black and white management, and keeping things very simple. So I'll cross this one. And there's a similar one question about dyslexia. We haven't tested it, with readers with dyslexia, although we do have an interest in dyslexia, and it is something likely that will come back to it, mainly because dyslexia is such a large spectrum, it's not one thing. But we've seen so many questionable typefaces designed for dyslexia, of always making it such a unique shapes. We want to come back to it and to see if there could be a different approach to reading of dyslexic readers.
The science is still developing, right? I mean, there's still a lot to understand about how the brain works. Even though we're in 21st century, I think there's still a lot that scientists are working on it's such a complicated process to fully grasp.
Reading also is very complex. Reading it involves so many things and so much, and for each person it also is different. So it's a very, very, very complex process that it's a lot to unpack. Yeah.
I think this is interesting what Hector says, that and that's why measuring reading efficiency, ease of reading, it's not one thing. So right now, what the project with Benjamin, with Integral for the hospital, it was about distance reading of short text. If you're going to design a typeface for books, it would be a completely different process, and also very different testing and validation. So there's a question about, does Zed work for screen readers? Yes, it does. I don't believe there's a big difference between reading on paper versus reading on screen. The difference is actually quite small, especially when the resolution of digital devices is much higher than before. The biggest impact for about reading is really the distance. Is it distance reading or is it close reading? So the visual angle changes some parameters of reading, and not so much the resolution. So usually typefaces well-designed typefaces will work regardless of of if it's presented on screen or versus on paper. There can be some optimizations, and also what I mentioned, like a black on white, white on black, but structurally they will not differ very much. And there's one more question about legibility for seniors, which always ask for bigger type. Yes, the best way to make things easy to read is increase the size, but that's not always possible. So we see that increasing the text size is the best, most obvious way to improve legibility. But in situations when there's a time, there is a space constraint, you need to change some other parameters. And we figured that the width was basically giving impression of more volume, more space, and that's why it is very beneficial for people with poor vision and senior readers.
Maybe the one with is the reference to auto-narrate, maybe. This
interesting.
Yeah, it's well, we have a background at Integral because Ribeau has worked a lot with the isotypes. I think it's interesting in a way that they're not icons, of course, so they are like little scenes that explains actions. And I think that could be interesting. You talked about the senior, and we had those experiences with those little illustrations, which are easier to understand for people who have Alzheimer or other diseases than just icons that we think are universal and that we understand, but they don't. So in this case, it's interesting to see that you don't have one icon, but you have maybe different drawings which explain a scene or something, and that is more understandable for a lot of people. In our case, well, as I'm just talking about the 1520, the hospital, we have patients which are at the hospital just for one day. Really, a few of them stay a night, but usually you see a specialist, and then you go back home. So we have to be a little quicker in the apprehensions of spaces, directions, orientation. So we don't have the same time as someone in a house, special house for old people that has to really find marks all over the place and has to be used to seeing the same signs. That's not the exact figure. The auto-narrates isotypes are, of course, very interesting, but so much used, I think, these days that I believe little more in what we're doing with icons. We're having different shapes and adapted to typography, and have the possibility to change icons depending on the different pathologies or circumstances than to have something really fixed as can be the isotypes.
Yeah, well, auto-narrate clearly opened doors for many of the information designers, and we're building on top of this heritage, but adapting it, for different contexts. And especially now when, we don't know exactly in which situation these icons will be used, we're making sure that, they are less ambiguous, in various conditions. So part of our work we're doing is, testing it in various cultures, because images can be more easily misunderstood. So making sure that, we eliminate this. And often during this process, there will be multiple, I remember when I'm drawing a drinking fountain for Benjamin, and it was so hard, to see how such a simple thing, drinking water, potable water, it's not easy to visualize. So, there's always multiple designs, and at the end, we choose the one which is the least ambiguous. And I think every icon designer and every pictogram designer is dealing with the same thing, and I think it's a matter of validation, and showing it to enough people with different backgrounds to be sure that they work.
Yeah, there's I think a small clarification in the chat about screen readers, which is I think just semantics. I think the devices. I think the question was more about devices that read the screen for vision impaired. So I imagine the answer is yes. It's a font. So any device that can read a font, Zed would work perfectly in that context. But it's also at that point the device is doing the additional work for someone who can't see. So it's like a visual reading of the text. I imagine Zed would work perfectly in that situation too.
Well, I guess any font would do, because this
Right.
is using basically system level text-to-speech mechanism. So, you don't really need, highly optimized text for visual impairments. Any font, like you could have a white text on white paper on a white surface, it would still work because it's read by machine.
Yeah, it's at that point it's replacing it's we're talking about something kind of in between. I guess the Zed's function is for people who can read but have quite difficult a time with that with speech to text. That's or text to speech is a shift. I think we probably have time for one question if there's anything that we haven't addressed. I think we could take one more.
I would imagine there's a question, the second question from Thomas Ladd about positioning of the messages. It's probably good for Benjamin, because we've been having discussion about this, like what is the optimal placement of a message scale.
Sorry, I don't see the question, Peter. What is it?
Does the length of the word, scale, height, placement, and context and isolation of type make a difference? So I think it's more about positioning, placing, sizing.
Well, that's why we really try to make a modular system with different lengths. So we have really various typologies of panels that we really place in different parts of the hospital. So we made some first test at the beginning with the spacing, and then when the font, was finalized, then we used the right spacing to increase some of our furniture. So really was a way to adapt all the time, and also to see the different places they had to be in. So yeah, of course, we have to deal with this. We have to deal with generous space all the time. We can't have too much, how can I say, the type doesn't have to feel empty and lost on the different panel, but it has to be really readable and really have some space still around it, so it can be comfortable for the lecturer. So there was an adaptation between formats and the type itself all the time.
And I'll group two questions as the last things. One is, are there any organizations out there trying to protect languages from being lost? And there's another one, specific one about which ones are we working on right now? So yes, we're not the only ones paying attention to endangered languages. Even UNESCO, which I mentioned, has a program about preservation of languages. So it happens on governmental level. There are language revitalization processes in many countries. France, Spain, Netherlands, like a big country, small countries, Canada, US. Basically, every country has some minority languages which are disappearing, and there is a value in this because with loss of language, we're losing access to information which is only available in those languages. So it's not about translation. It is about identity. It is about preservation of many things. And I think Unicode is doing tremendous work also. We mentioned 7,000 languages. Half of the languages out there are oral. They don't have a standardized orthography. And those are the most vulnerable ones. So not being able to write them down. So there's about hundreds of writing scripts which are not encoded fully. So there's a lot of work still to be done in terms of standardization of small languages. We're working, for example, right now with Mongolian, with language which only now is being properly sanitized to the point where we can develop digital fonts, because we can only engage with languages when there's digital infrastructure that allows doing it. So sometimes we work with languages which are historical and have a long tradition, and sometimes we work with languages which is very fascinating. We work with living languages which have been designed, writing script designed only recently, 5-10 years ago. So we work with living inventors of languages, and we can actually communicate about, like what the needs are. And often those languages don't have, much, hardly any fonts because they're so new. So this is, there is a lot of work, we're far from the only ones. Unicode is a good way because it documents and has the publicly available information, and often resources about other places and people who are engaging with these communities. So we do a lot of work in India, in India, in northeast of India, we're working now with a language called Chakma, which is like a fairly young one, with Old Chiki, which is also like a less than 50 years old history, with like a Vancho, again, like a fairly young 20th century language. So there's plenty of work for lifetime.
Yeah, I would also recommend folks to obviously keep an eye on what Peter and Typotheque is doing. They have an incredible website with a lot of resources. They collaborate with so many organizations. We posted a lot of links in the chat, but if you go through their website, they have an incredible collection. Mark Jammer's TypeCulture website has a lot of references and research. So there's resources out there. Essentially, once you start going into one location, you'll branch out. So and of course we have the talk on the 15th, which is related, unrelated, but certainly picking up on some of the conversations we were having here. Morgan's research and creating expanding the Unicode, especially for historical research for languages that for museums and cultural organizations that are doing cultural preservations of languages that maybe have disappeared. And so there's this incredible vast body of work still to be done. So I wanted to close here. I will say that because there's so much content, we don't have a way to send links out to people through, it's just a quirk of Eventbrite, but we will post a one-pager with all the links that we shared in the chat to the description of the talk for today. We'll go into the coopertype.org/lectures, and you find the lecture for today. In the description, we'll have a link to a one page where you can find all the links. And we'll also do that in the Vimeo probably description. I think that they allow links in there, so we'll just compile all of these. But I wanted to just huge thank you to Peter for leading this discussion and having the conversation, to Hector and Benjamin for their incredible research and insight and generosity in your time here to explain all this stuff and to add this incredible kind of a portal of research and information to folks who are interested in this, and hopefully a lot of new information, certainly for me. So I really incredibly appreciate your time, your energy, and all of the things that you do for the type community, for the design community, and for people out there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. We'll see you soon, guys.
Bye.
Thank you. Trying to find a way how to close the, and I don't think I have all of the host tools, but you guys can log off. I think we're good. Thank you again so much.
Thank you.
Here, guys.
Bye-bye.